Okay, so I have one more technique for you, and this is creating a custom exception. The exceptions that we've discussed so far are like just a small handful that we talked about are really pretty much all we need, especially for this class with the file not found, index out of range. That's a huge one. That's definitely something we have to think about because we use a lot of arrays. And format exception, that's another one. So like those are the exceptions that we're just going to keep catching over and over again. But let's say there was a situation where there is no existing exception in the .NET framework or the framework class library to accommodate this problem that we're anticipating. So for example, let's say I have a user entering a negative weight. I think I was going to do a negative height, but I'm going to do a negative weight. Let's say this user enters a negative 100 pounds. It would not have been a problem with the height because the height is squared in the formula, so I'd get a positive out of that. But now I've got a negative BMI. This isn't a huge deal, but let's say I wanted to avoid that. Let's say I want to make sure that the user cannot enter a negative number, and I want to use exception handling to do that. So because it's not going to throw a format exception, this is a perfectly legal number, but I don't want a negative in this program. So what I can do is do a homemade exception. And this is going to be my own custom exception. So here's what I'm going to do. Do you see me over here in the Solution Explorer? I'm going to right-click on the project name in bold, and I'm going to add a class. Now we're going to be doing this a lot in the coming weeks, talking about objects and classes, but this, you don't have to get too wrapped up in this right now. Just right-click, add a class, and then you're going to name your exception something specific, like, well, how about we'll do negative weight exception. Okay. And so now again, you're going to be up to your eyeballs in this in a few weeks from now. But right now, we don't have to spend a lot of time in here. What we do need to do is put a colon here. That is a colon, not a semicolon, and type the word exception. I'm not even going to explain this. It's not going to make any sense. It would just be a really long tangent. So let's just leave it at that. So I'm going to save this file. That's all I need to do. I'm going to close it up. Okay, so now I've got my negative weight exception. It's part of this program here, and what I'll do is okay, so this is where I've parsed the height and the weight, so now I've got the weight, and I'm going to do a quick if statement. I'll say if DEC weight is less than 0, meaning I've got a negative number, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to throw a new negative weight exception. Okay, that is the code. And so it's like the Visual Studio is not going to throw that exception automatically because the Visual Studio doesn't recognize it as a problem. But we know it's a problem, and so we can proactively throw that exception if they type a negative weight. So what I'll do is I'll add a catch block to catch that negative weight exception. Okay, and then from there I can just type a very specific message. I'll just copy one of these. Okay, and I would say to my user, weight cannot be negative. Please re-enter or whatever. So I'll just test it real quick. Okay, there you have it. Now, getting back to something I said in the first video in this series talking about exceptions, if you can avoid throwing an exception with just good sound coding practices, that is what you should do. So this was not really the best example. I only did it just to show you that you can take control and do your own custom exceptions, but really probably a better way of handling this would be to, I mean, I didn't really have to throw the exception and catch it. I could have just made sure, for example, that here I am parsing the weight. I'm just going to wrap this, whatever comes through. If it's parsed, I can wrap that in the math.abs, which is the absolute value function. Then I don't need any of this. It's handled right there on the spot. So that's an example of what I was talking about. Like good solid coding is going to avert a lot of exceptions anyway. But there are some things, like especially when you have user input involved, or the file thing with the file not found, there are certain things that you just simply have no control over, and you are going to have to do some catching of exceptions. At the very least, a generic catch-all, just in case.